Appreciate the things that Gabriel said there in the last panel. We premeditated this even before knowing some of the things that would be said by some of our speakers. And the goal for this particular panel, which is Social Justice and the Church, a Female Perspective. So I, as a pastor, get to interview 6 ladies, 7. Are we missing somebody? Where's Judith? You're supposed to be up here. Nice try. Every parent that has a lot of children has that moment, one day they're driving home from church and realize, I'm missing one of my kids. And I haven't had that moment yet. She's not quite young enough to be one of my kids, but thank you for coming back up here. Okay, so what I wanted to do, and I hope you'll find this edifying, certainly a creative idea, is really as a pastor to ask a number of ladies who've now listened to or spoken to this subject over the last just about a full day now, what your thoughts are and your perspective are as it relates to the subject of social justice. And I'll remind our guests here that you can text in your questions. And if we can get that number back on the board, please. My phone number has been up there before. So I have a handful of questions, and then from that, we'll open up to those that come in via text. Let me introduce those you don't already know. So you heard from Judith yesterday evening. I need to remember, ladies, look at me. We need to hold the mic here. I was just doing it wrongly. You can hear a little difference there. So Judith Dinsmore is managing editor for New Horizons. Okay. Janiyah is a member of our church here and one of the world's best babysitters, like a child to our family. You know who Diane is. And then Alicia Williams is the wife of Gabriel, who just spoke, and Alicia will be speaking after dinner tonight. Very much looking forward to hearing your speech. Okay, and then Desi is here in the middle. Desi is, what do I want to say about you? So she is a religion and philosophy student at Flagler College. She is newly engaged. That's kind of a big deal. I might be doing their wedding. I'm still deciding. Just kidding. And a wonderful babysitter. What my daughter did, my 4-month-old daughter did to Desi's clothes a week ago can't really be described, but I wondered if my daughter was an alien, and I'm just delighted that Desi's not only forgiven us, but come back this weekend, so we're grateful for that. And then Elisa Francis is here, coming down from Virginia. Her husband is involved in a ministry to men. Tell me the name of the ministry. 180 Exchange. And she also is a homeschool mom, mother of 4 children, and we're glad that she's able to come down and participate. And then Leanne here has come probably from the farthest and coldest region of Canada to be here, and really encourages me. I actually had the privilege of preaching at her church a number of weeks ago, Trinity URC in St. Catharines, Canada. And she agreed to come down and help with the piano for our conference. And then she and her mom got trapped in Detroit overnight because of snow and almost turned around and said, go home. What would you do? When they told you you're sleeping here at the airport, would you wake up the next day and keep coming? Or would you just, read the tea leaves and turn around and bail? Well, they came. And I'm very grateful and encouraged that they came. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on some of this stuff as well. Okay, so the first question is to any who would like to answer it, right? So how would you, the panelists, define social justice, or maybe what isn't social justice?
Social injustice. Just kidding.
That'll be your last one, Desi, so thank you for coming, and I will shake my daughter next time you get ready to hold her. So, who would like to take a stab at defining social justice as you see it, or what you think is its injustice or its antithesis? Alicia? Wait.
Okay. If you wanted to define social justice as it actually is defined, which is looking at redistributing resources, goods, power, what have you, to level everything out for everyone. I would say that is social justice. I personally don't agree with that. But that is actually what social justice is. I don't believe social justice is just, well, I didn't get what you got. You know, it's not an issue of just fairness, like our concept of fairness. And the reason I would say that is because it rubs up against God's sovereignty and his providence and how he ordains and orchestrates the circumstances of each of our lives. So I wouldn't just say, oh, you got that and I didn't get that. That's a huge problem. So I wouldn't, the way it's being redefined, I wouldn't agree with it, but yeah.
Okay, all right. Anyone else will take a stab at it? Judith, were you motioning?
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe because I'm seeking for some unity, that really across the political spectrum, I think that you could find some agreement in that when you're talking about justice, and with Gabriel Williams' really helpful explanation of the importance of justice and charity. So when you're talking about these things, it's easy to indicate that you can stop at an attitude or at a posture, but because as humans, we have a lot of needs. Also across the spectrum, as humans, we appreciate actions. And so the church does, and as Gabriel Williams said, hospitality, that is an action that's very tangible. And so when we think about social justice, that can be a starting point to say, you know, we do have agreement that it has to be so much more than just an attitude, a meme, something you share, or a posture. It has to be more.
Thank you, that's helpful. Alicia, a question to you. So social justice issues are hotly debated: immigration, racial discrimination, healthcare, welfare, incarceration, etc. How can Christians work for the betterment of their community alongside and in the context of their church when they know full well that even their local church is never going to be unified on these social justice issues? This is for you.
Could you repeat that, please?
No, I can't repeat that. Social justice issues are hotly debated: immigration, racial discrimination, healthcare, welfare, incarceration, etc. How can Christians work for the betterment of their community alongside and in the context of their church when they know full well that even their local church may never be unified on the issues of social justice?
I think that goes back to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 11. And it talks about pursuing righteousness, love, steadfastness. So I think that the way that we can start is by having the heart of Christ, which is that we pursue it. It may not happen, or it may not happen in the way that we want, but there's a pursuit for it, and that's what we're called to.
Okay, that's good. Desi, to you. So you are, if I understand correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you are part Filipino, college student studying religion, and as I mentioned, recently engaged. Why do you think social justice has become such an important issue to millennials?
I think it's because it's part of like where they find their identity. I guess I could include myself. We find our identity, but I don't really agree with that. So if you you were talking about Carl Truman earlier. I know he referenced this book in one of his lectures where the guy divides up history by 4 types of man. And one was like a man who found his identity in the citizen or citizenship, which was like ancient Greece and stuff. And then the other man was in the Middle Ages, medieval times, and he found his identity in kind of the church, but the Catholic Church at the time. And then the next man was, I'm pretty sure, financial man, and that was up until, I guess it was a big gap, but up until close to now. And then now he said it's like psychological man. So where we look to for our not only identity, but peace and happiness and fulfillment is within ourselves. And when that's threatened by things that happen in society, that's kind of why they want, like, social justice is such a big issue, I guess. Because social injustice is what's threatening where they find their identity, I guess.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Thank
And,
you.
sorry, and like, just more movements towards, I guess, freeing, like, sexuality and different things like that, I guess.
Okay, Janiyah. So Janiyah, you, and for those you don't know, Janiyah is Terrence's granddaughter. So Janiyah, you have grown up, for the most part, in our church, which is a mostly Caucasian OPC here in St. Augustine. As a child of the church, now a communicant member, what are some ways that you have felt loved and embraced by the church? And what are some things that you could suggest either our church or other churches do to make young ladies like yourself feel protected, safe, and loved in the arms of the church?
I would say a couple of things that made me feel very embraced is not only have you guys just been like very involved spiritually with my family, but as well as just in our personal lives and just helping us out like with things like school and things that we've needed with a house and with the hurricane, destroying our house and stuff. So you guys have just been like a family to us, and we've just I haven't felt like an outcast and felt different when it comes to just being in a predominantly white church. And I don't think anything you guys could do better because you guys are pretty awesome. So.
It's really my wife's cooking, isn't it? Okay, Alicia, a question for you. The reason I often hear for why we ought to advocate for social justice is that we need to follow the example of Christ, the table turner, who came to set free the prisoner, heal the sick, and bind up the brokenhearted. What motivates the panelists, such as yourself, to want to seek justice in Christ-honoring ways?
What motivates?
Yep.
What motivates? I guess the motivation is to honor Christ and what we do, to do what he commands of us. And I can say for myself, if I'm being very honest, I'm not the rallying in the streets type of woman.
You're not a table turner?
Huh?
You're not a table turner?
No, totally. Maybe at home if I get upset enough, but
That's
No.
why he was sweating.
right. Not publicly. Not publicly. But I can say something that my husband mentioned is being invested in my own community and the things that are actually going on around us. Now being at home and being a mom and having a husband that works the ridiculous amount of hours that my husband does, I don't have that much freedom of time to be invested. But basically, I try to be invested in the little ways that I can. And as I approach each new season of life, as my children grow and things, I'm thinking about different ways I can be invested as I get, as they get a little bit older, or I have a little bit of more time, where I can show them how to actually be involved in the community in a way that is pleasing to the Lord as well. And that, teaches them to be invested in. It's not just the little sphere of our house, and then we just drive to church, and so that's all you know, but to know the places between home and church as well. So
That's good. Let me follow up. This is one of those questions where you first read it like, maybe I should avoid that one, but I'm not going to avoid that. I often lack wisdom in those areas. So here's the question, maybe a follow-up for you, Janiyah, but anybody else could take it. I'm assuming that this is going to be for our African-American sisters. But how have you felt unloved by a predominantly Caucasian church? So I asked the question, how have you felt loved? Someone texted in, how have you felt, and I'm quoting it verbatim, how have you felt unloved by a predominantly Caucasian church? So if Janiyah or any of the other ladies would like to answer that, feel free to.
I haven't.
Ladies?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't think I have felt unloved. I think I've felt kind of out of place at times. And I don't think feeling out of place is an issue of not being loved. It's just me recognizing I'm in a different environment, and I don't necessarily know the culture or the things that go on in this environment, and so it's going to be a learning curve. So I can tell you I've felt plenty out of place before, but not unloved. I can say that.
Okay. Diane, question for you. Do you see a conflict between the church fulfilling the Great Commission and engaging social justice at the same time? Why or why not?
Well, that's a big question, and I think underlies a lot of the discussions we've had the last 2 days. Kind of an important one as a member of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, because our church began in 1936, and a lot of the reason it came about was because of that tension, that the mainline church seemed to have put aside the authority of Scripture or the demands of supernatural religion and supernatural grace, and was focusing mainly on the earthly, including its efforts in missions or in just the needs of the society. That was part of the drive to start the OPC. So I think that carries over today, that we might be cautious when it comes to matters like that, maybe even suspicious. But I don't think there's anything about the Great Commission itself that puts up that either or. Either you pursue word or life. Either you're heavenly minded or you're earthly good. In fact, I don't think that that's Christ's message at all. In his discussions that are in both Matthew and Luke, where he tells us to seek first the kingdom of God, in both those contexts, when you look a little further beyond those verses, it's seek first the kingdom of God, that these things may be added to you, right? And these other things will be added. And these other things that are added are earthly concerns, material matters, clothing, food. In the Luke passage, there's a young man who's just come to him and saying, tell my brother to give me the inheritance. And Jesus' response isn't that food doesn't matter, or clothing doesn't matter, or that the earthly doesn't matter, or the inheritance doesn't matter. It's a change in perspective, that we seek first God's kingdom. And it's not a matter of numeric priority. You do this and then you can move on to the others. But that our view of Christ and his kingdom has to permeate all those other concerns. So not either or, but that the kingdom concern permeates whatever our efforts are there.
Thank you. Leanne, pass the mic down, please, if you would. So, Leanne, so you flew through the frozen side of hell to get here. I'd like to talk a little about why. I hear you talk about, why are you here? And I'll say for our friends, you're coming from a, mostly Caucasian, Dutch Reformed background. What brings you into this conversation? What do you hope to see in your own church?
Well, obviously, weather was kind of a factor to bring me here. I mean, any excuse to leave.
Now you know you can
I'm
trust
there.
her.
Well, obviously, you came to preach and the invitation, and it was, I think it's just really providential, and I'm still dealing with that, just coming here and listening to the speakers and being a part of this discussion. It's really clear that we're in quite a different atmosphere, at least in my home church, than here, very Caucasian. Dutch Reformed background. I worship at a church where, my grandparents worship and my parents worship and all my siblings worship, and that's kind of how our community is really defined. And there's a number of churches in the area, and we have really big supporting school. I'm a teacher there, and so we've got this beautiful covenant community that just go generations back. 600 kids we're talking here, and and they're all coming from this background. So it's beautiful and it's amazing. It is something else, I think, and you mentioned that too when you were there, to worship and to have this history that, we call it Dutch bingo, when you can just say, who are you married to? Oh, yeah, I know who that is. And it is kind of like that. And, oh, yeah, you kind of look like so-and-so. And, it's this really weird, big community thing, and it's so beautiful. But it also can be dangerous, because when somebody who's not from that community comes in, it's going to really push your boundaries. You talked about, being unloved. And sometimes I think, you can have a visitor come to your church, and because it's been this way for so long, and you know who to talk to, you know exactly your corner where the coffee is, and I can go talk to them. That's easy. But what about that person who's new, and can we reach out to them? And because we've got these generations, it's you can get a little too comfortable where you are. And now in our own church, we've been really blessed by a member who has come to us from Egypt, and his name is Thabit Magali, and he started a Muslim outreach program through our church. So all of a sudden, our pews are being filled a little bit more with other people, and primarily people from Muslim backgrounds, from people who have come to Canada with some pretty crazy stories. And we're really being stretched there to reach out to these people and, learn from their cultures and from their backgrounds. And then to come here and just, listen to these words of wisdom and just encouragements. It's really amazing. It's something I think that we can, and I know there's some people from my own area here that we can really bring and be encouraged by and really apply to what's happening in my own church.
Good. So let me ask what I imagine will be a sensitive, if not a difficult question for whoever would like to answer it. So last year, I took my daughter to Winnipeg, Canada, and spoke there for a church. And on a free day, took my daughter. We have 4 adopted kids, interracial, unrelated to one another. And so this is my oldest daughter who's with me on this trip. And we went to a museum, a civil rights museum there in Winnipeg that had a significant amount of space devoted to what were referred to as vulnerable people groups. And so the vulnerable people groups included indigenous peoples, what we would call Native Americans here in the States, to African Americans, and to the homosexual community. My daughter, who's often more brilliant and insightful than I am, pointed out they need a floor devoted to unborn children. And one of the things that strikes me as I listen to the subject about social justice is it appears from my perspective, and this is just a male's perspective, a pastor's perspective, very little discussion about the unprotected rights of the unborn, even by those who are arguing the loudest for the importance of social justice in and out of the church. And in the African American community, if I understand correctly, the statistic on abortion is higher there than any other ethnic people group here in the States. So how do you perceive this? Why is it that while so many are shouting loudly about the rights of vulnerable people groups, almost no one, including many African American social justice advocates, are talking about the rights of the unborn?
I guess because those people who are shouting for that include women in one of those like vulnerable people groups, and so they value their rights or see them as something to be like lifted up above the babies. I guess they're trying to protect their rights too.
Okay.
And I guess one of those rights would be rights to their body.
I'm sorry, say that again. I couldn't
One
quite
of
hear you.
those rights would be a right to their body, or which they would say the baby is like part of their like body. I'm just saying what someone would say about that. So.
Yeah. Any of the moms want to interact with that?
Y'all saw that, right? I will say I do think there are some people who are advocating social justice and then also trying to advocate for the rights of unborn children. I'm not going to say it's the majority. I don't know, percentages, but I do think there are some. But as to why more of them do not, I think it comes down to sin, selfishness in the hearts. People want autonomy, and they think, I'm here now, my autonomy is valuable, and it's more valuable than someone I can't see. I may be able to feel you, but I can't see you. And I think it's a lot of heartbreaking sin. And I'm from the state of Virginia, so even this past week of hearing what the Virginia governor said and what is being proposed, I was mortified, so upset. And I remember going through school when they did the mandatory sex education in public schools, and my mom opted me out of a whole lot of stuff. But one of the things she did let me sit in was the fact that celibacy was actually taught, and that was something I mentioned on Facebook. Like, we act like being celibate is no longer an option. It's either birth control or abortion, and that's even one of the billboards near our home. It was like, I forgot exactly what it says, but it's like, abortion is like a safe option. And I was like, what? For who? So it's become just so much more casual now because people want what they want. So, that's all I have.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think like the women's rights thing is a way to disguise that like autonomy or desire for autonomy.
Judith, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's not an answer, it's more of another observation, and just that people in my age group, I really see that the abortion issue is becoming less and less cool. It's less and less, you'll gain less cred from people by becoming an abortion rights advocate, verbally, no matter what you believe in private. And I've certainly felt the effect of that. So in the last 10 years, I think that that's kind of quieted a lot of people that are in my age, that we don't really want to say much about abortion necessarily, regardless of our beliefs, because it's just not something people want to hear about. It's not as cool as a different justice issue.
Yeah. Someone asked if we were going to do another conference like this next year, and when I was done twitching, I said if I were to do one, the next one would actually be on social justice in the family and talk about things like this, or adoption, or the rediscovery of fatherhood, and where are the men in the church, and things like that. So this is last question, open question to all. We can take a couple stabs at answering it. But as a pastor, I appreciate very much the fact that every week, nice people like you have to listen to me do all the things that I do from the pulpit. The whole point of this panel really has been to reverse that role in the sense of creating a space in which we can just listen. And so there are a lot of pastors, church planners, about to be pastors, church planners, elders. But what is it you think that we may be missing, viewed from the pew? What do you think it is that pastors like myself, church leaders, may be missing in the consideration of things related to social justice that would hearten you to see us consider and try to act on more? What are we missing? I was hoping no one was going to answer that and say, nothing, let's eat.
This is sort of piggybacking off of the last question, sort of leading into this. I think that in some ways, folks aren't being educated, or they're not talking about topics because they're not being educated, or they're hard topics, but it doesn't mean that they're not supposed to be talked about. So I just think that for areas where there is, well, you know that it's rough topics or hard topics, just devoting time to talk about those topics. So not being afraid, not saying that you're afraid or anything, but just for pastors to feel more encouraged in talking about hard topics, or talking about things that people feel we need to talk about it in the church, because it's being talked about outside of the church. So what better place to talk about those things than in the church, so that we can discuss these things that are hard.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to go off of that, I would say that almost maybe sometimes as a Christian you can feel that you shouldn't say anything because your opinion is going to be offensive. And I really appreciated the last speaker and how, how political issues and social, how they can really seep in and overskew the biblical authority that we need to adhere to. And I think just for pastors to talk about it and, to have discussions like this and, to educate the congregation about it, so that, you can defend, and then you know what to talk about, or maybe the questions that you should be asking, or the defense that you can give. And I think it's really important, because at least in my university career, I thought, I shouldn't say anything. Or that was a lot of times maybe how you feel, because suddenly, because we adhere to God and His Word, all of a sudden some of these things like abortion, gay and lesbian rights, and those things, you're going to start sounding offensive. But we need to be emboldened to talk about it, not be afraid, encouragement to do so, and even just knowing how to do so.
Yeah, that was funny. I would say, piggybacking off of both of you, I think the caution, and at least from what we've heard from the speakers earlier today, is making sure that we don't veer away from what the church's ultimate goal and purpose is, to preach the gospel, to proclaim the word. And so I think finding a place to talk about those issues is important, but I think also for pastors and elders to actually teach your members how to grow in wisdom. And really and I love talking about wisdom, something I love, but it's literally, it's a skill of living a godly life. And you have to develop it. It's not something that's just gonna fall out the sky and hit you. Oh, I just know how to respond to everything. You're not. But actually teaching your members how to be discerning, how to look at issues from various perspectives. And I don't think that happens necessarily on a Sunday morning, like when you're supposed to be preaching a sermon, but it may be like a special topics evening, or, something else, or, just communications or something, groups that maybe you can meet up with in your church, because you don't want to take away from what you should be gaining on Sundays, on the Lord's Day. You don't want to take away from that. We need that. but also just to teach and instruct. And really, I mean, this comes back to discipleship. Lots of things are going around that are happening around us. How do we, as the people of God, conduct ourselves in this world?
So let me follow up on that. I think let's squeeze in one more question here, but it's a follow-up to what you just said, and it seems like a great last question. How do you overcome cultural differences, often associated with different racial groups, to foster better fellowship between women in the church? Examples of cultural differences would include parenting styles, what we do for entertainment, what food we eat, how touchy-feely we are, how private we are.
I would say it's through relationship. So just hospitality, having folks in your home, saying, intentionally, having relationships where you say, hey, come with me, and inviting someone into your life so that they can see the way that you parent, where you're shopping, how you're reading your word. So I think hospitality, just in terms of engaging people in day-to-day life, and pursuing that, intentionally pursuing relationship with our sisters, I think would help with that.
That's great. Anyone else?
I guess also, you talked about actively pursuing relationship. I think a big problem, especially for young people, would be like just being apathetic towards wanting to understand the place of the other person and like their cultural differences and how that affects their view of things. Because I guess you just you see yourself as the default, but then you don't really care to understand. I know that's like, in my case, it's not like I'm a racist or anything, but I'm the stander by or something.
So I think with that, that we're talking about this topic of reconciliation and relationship. And so if that is our heart, then we are seeking the Lord for ways that we can do that. So if that means that if there's a weakness that we're looking within ourselves, that we have to die to self, because our aim is to glorify God and to pursue the things that are dear to his heart. And so there's this inward look at ourselves as to sins within our own selves. All of us have weaknesses, and but that we seek the Lord to help us to get back past that, to engage and have relationship, even though it may not be comfortable.
I can only add, serve with people you don't know in your church. If you have an opportunity to serve with women who are older than you, take it. In our church, serving on nursery duty with older women, it's like a great time to spend like an hour and a half chatting it up. You hear about their grandkids, you hear about how they discipline their kids, and you share stories about whose kids were crazier. It's great. It's a fun time to actually just serve and also study with other people. Don't just study with just your peers. I know in my church, I was really, really, really blessed. They had older women meeting together like on like a Tuesday morning or like a Wednesday morning at a coffee shop for Bible study. And I dragged my daughter, 2 years old. She didn't do much at the time, so dragged her to sit in the coffee shop and studying with older women, and I was like the youngest person there, and did that for like over a year, and it blessed my soul. And I have those, I can't do it now because homeschooling, but I have those lasting relationships with these older women in my church, that a lot of younger women are like, man, I need to find a way to, do that or, connect like that. So I would suggest those two things. And then hospitality. One of the biggest things I love about hospitality is just asking people, what do you normally eat? And they're like, no, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, what do you normally eat? Like, we're different people, or you come from a different background. What's normal for you? I want you to be comfortable when you come into my home. So let me figure out what's normal to you, and then I'll plan something. And even just that opens the doors for conversation, you know, when they get like, I can't believe you did. Yeah, I did. This will make you comfortable. I want you to be comfortable. I don't want to serve you something that you're gonna like, I can't believe she did that. So I want you to be comfortable in my home, but it really does foster so much conversation just by even just asking that simple question. I found out.
I just want to sort of piggyback off of that. I know that there are different contexts here, but even in terms of discipleship, if you have access to women who don't look like you, being open to being in a relationship with someone who doesn't look like you, that may be older or younger, to build relationship. I just think that would be helpful.
That's great. Well, on the idea of hospitality, food, and mixing it up a little bit, why don't we do that? If you would, please go ahead and give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, ladies.